From the early battles for land to the global confrontations of the 20th century, the wars fought by the United States have left an indelible mark on its history. Join us as we explore the defining conflicts that shaped the nation. American Revolutionary War, 1775 to 1783. The American Revolutionary War marked the birth of the United States, fought between the 13 colonies and Great Britain. The conflict began on April 19, 1775, with the battles of Lexington and Concord. Colonists opposed British policies such as taxation without representation and sought independence from King George III's rule. The war witnessed the formation of the Continental Army, led by George Washington, facing the might of the British Empire. Despite being underfunded and outnumbered, the Americans showed resilience. A turning point came in 1777 at the Battle of Saratoga, where an American victory convinced France to form an alliance, providing financial and military support. Spain and the Netherlands later joined the effort against Britain, turning the conflict into a global war. Major battles included Bunker Hill, Trenton, and Yorktown. The Siege of Yorktown in 1781 forced British General Cornwallis to surrender, effectively ending major combat. The Treaty of Paris, 1783, officially ended the war, granting the U.S. independence and territory stretching to the Mississippi River. The Revolutionary War had profound effects, inspiring other independence movements globally. It established principles of liberty, democracy, and self-rule, leaving a legacy of courage and determination. Northwest Indian War, 1785 to 1795. The Northwest Indian War, also called Little Turtles' War, was a conflict between the United States and a coalition of Native American tribes, including the Shawnee, Miami, and Delaware. These tribes resisted U.S. expansion into the Northwest Territory following the Revolutionary War. The Treaty of Paris, 1783, granted this land to the U.S., but Native tribes, with support from British forces stationed in Canada, rejected American claims. The conflict began in 1785 and saw early Native victories, including the disastrous defeat of General Arthur St. Clair's forces in 1791, known as St. Clair's Defeat. It remains one of the worst defeats in U.S. military history. President George Washington responded by reorganizing the military under General Anthony Wayne. In 1794, Wayne led U.S. forces to a decisive victory at the Battle of Fallen Timbers. This battle crushed Native resistance, and British forces failed to intervene. The war ended with the Treaty of Greenville, 1795, in which Native tribes ceded large portions of land in present-day Ohio and Indiana to the U.S. The conflict marked the beginning of westward expansion, but also deepened tensions with Native tribes, leading to future conflicts. Quasi-War, 1798 to 1800. The Quasi-War was an undeclared naval conflict between the United States and France, stemming from deteriorating relations during the French Revolutionary Wars. After the U.S. signed the Jay Treaty with Britain in 1795, France viewed it as a betrayal and began seizing American merchant ships. Diplomatic efforts to resolve tensions failed, notably during the XYZ affair in 1797, when French agents demanded bribes to negotiate, outraging the American public. In response, President John Adams strengthened the U.S. Navy, leading to clashes between American and French vessels in the Caribbean and Atlantic. Notable engagements included the capture of French privateers and the U.S. frigate USS Constellation defeating the French frigate L'Insurgente in 1799. The U.S. Navy's success demonstrated its growing capability as a maritime force. The conflict ended with the Convention of 1800, Treaty of Mortefontaine, restoring peace without formal war. It marked a significant step in establishing U.S. naval power and maintaining neutrality in European conflicts. First Barbary War, 1801 to 1805. The First Barbary War was the United States' first significant military engagement abroad, fought against the Barbary states of North Africa, Tripoli, Algiers, Tunis, and Morocco. These states demanded tribute payments from nations to allow safe passage for their ships in the Mediterranean. Refusing to pay, President Thomas Jefferson sent the U.S. Navy to protect American interests. The war began in 1801, when Tripoli declared war on the United States. The U.S. responded by deploying a naval squadron, led by Commodore Edward Preble, to blockade Tripoli's ports. Early operations involved skirmishes and raids, but a key turning point came in 1804. Lieutenant Stephen Decatur led a daring mission to destroy the captured American ship USS Philadelphia in Tripoli Harbor, preventing its use by enemy forces. In 1805, American and Allied mercenaries launched a ground campaign in Tripoli. William Eaton led an expedition across the Libyan desert, capturing the city of Derna in a dramatic victory. This success pressured the Pasha of Tripoli into negotiating peace. The Treaty of Tripoli ended hostilities, with the U.S. agreeing to a reduced ransom for American prisoners. The war showcased America's resolve to defend its interests and laid the foundation for its future naval power. War of 1812, 1812 to 1815. The War of 1812 was fought between the United States and Great Britain, fueled by British restrictions on American trade, the impressment of American sailors into the Royal Navy, and British support for Native American resistance against U.S. expansion. The U.S. declared war in June 1812, hoping to assert its sovereignty and expand into Canada. However, the war began poorly for the Americans, with failed invasions of Canada and the loss of Detroit. The British blockaded U.S. ports, crippling trade. Key moments included the successful defense of Baltimore in 1814, inspiring Francis Scott Key to write The Star-Spangled Banner. Naval victories, such as the USS Constitution's defeat of HMS Guerriere, boosted American morale. The British burned Washington, D.C. in 1814, but the U.S. repelled their advance at Fort McHenry and New Orleans. The war ended with the Treaty of Ghent in December 1814, restoring pre-war borders without addressing the initial causes of the conflict. The war's conclusion, marked by Andrew Jackson's victory at the Battle of New Orleans in 1815, boosted national pride and secured U.S. sovereignty. Second Barbary War, 1815. The Second Barbary War, also called the Algerine War, was a brief but decisive conflict between the United States and Algiers. After the War of 1812, the Barbary states resumed attacking American and European shipping in the Mediterranean, seeking tribute payments. President James Madison authorized a military response to assert American naval dominance. In 1815, two naval squadrons, commanded by Commodores Stephen Decatur and William Bainbridge, were dispatched to the region. Decatur's fleet quickly captured two Algerian ships and pressured the Dey of Algiers to negotiate. The resulting treaty ended tribute payments, freed American prisoners, and guaranteed safe passage for U.S. ships. The Second Barbary War demonstrated the U.S. Navy's growing strength and marked the end of Barbary piracy as a major threat to American commerce. Mexican-American War, 1846 to 1848. The Mexican-American War began in 1846 after a dispute over the U.S. annexation of Texas, which Mexico still considered part of its territory. The war was initiated when U.S. troops, led by General Zachary Taylor, clashed with Mexican forces along the disputed border region. The conflict quickly escalated, with the U.S. gaining significant victories in battles such as the Battle of Buena Vista and the capture of Mexico City. U.S. President James K. Polk sought to expand the nation's territory, motivated by the belief in manifest destiny, which held that the U.S. was destined to expand across the continent. The Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, signed in 1848, ended the war. Mexico ceded a vast portion of land, including present-day California, Arizona, New Mexico, and other southwestern territories. which collectively became known as the Mexican Cession. In return, the U.S. paid $15 million and assumed $3.25 million in Mexican debts. This treaty reshaped the American Southwest, but it also sparked intense debates about the expansion of slavery into the new territories, contributing to tensions that led to the Civil War. While the U.S. achieved its territorial goals, the war left deep scars in U.S.-Mexico relations that have echoed throughout history. American Civil War, 1861 to 1865. The American Civil War was a pivotal conflict that emerged from the long-standing issue of slavery in the United States. Tensions between the North, where industrialization was on the rise, and the South, where slavery was integral to its agricultural economy, reached a boiling point after the election of Abraham Lincoln in 1860. The South, fearing the abolition of slavery, seceded from the Union, forming the Confederacy. In 1861, the Confederacy attacked Fort Sumter in South Carolina, marking the beginning of the war. The war saw some of the most intense and bloody battles in American history, including the Battle of Gettysburg, the Siege of Vicksburg, and the Battle of Antietam, the bloodiest day in U.S. military history. The Union's industrial and manpower advantages slowly wore down the Confederacy. A turning point came in 1863 when Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation, which declared all enslaved people in Confederate states free, shifting the war's focus to the abolition of slavery. After 4 years of brutal fighting and immense loss of life, General Robert E. Lee, commander of the Confederate Army, surrendered to Union General Ulysses S. Grant at Appomattox Courthouse in April 1865. The Civil War preserved the Union and led to the abolition of slavery, but it also left lasting social, economic, and political divisions, particularly in the South. Spanish-American War, 1898. The Spanish-American War was a brief but impactful conflict between the United States and Spain, ignited by U.S. intervention in Cuba's fight for independence from Spanish rule. Tensions were high due to reports of Spanish atrocities in Cuba, amplified by yellow journalism, which fueled public sentiment for war. The immediate catalyst came in February 1898 when the USS Maine, an American battleship, exploded in Havana Harbor, killing 266 American sailors. While the cause of the explosion remains debated, the incident was used as a rallying cry for war under the banner of "Remember the Maine." The war was fought in both the Caribbean and the Pacific. The U.S. quickly defeated the Spanish fleet in the Battle of Manila Bay and seized Puerto Rico, Guam, and the Philippines, signaling a dramatic shift in U.S. foreign policy towards imperialism. Spain's defeat led to the Treaty of Paris, which officially ended the war in December 1898. Under the treaty, Spain ceded control of Puerto Rico, Guam, and the Philippines to the United States. The war marked the U.S.'s emergence as a global power with colonial possessions. However, the annexation of the Philippines sparked a bitter insurgency led by Filipino nationalists who fought against U.S. rule, leading to the Philippine-American War. Despite these challenges, the Spanish-American War laid the foundation for the U.S.'s future role in world affairs and imperialism. World War I, 1914 to 1918, U.S. did. U.S. involvement, 1917 to 1918. World War I was a devastating global conflict that began in 1914, primarily involving the Allied powers, France, Russia, and the UK, and the Central Powers, Germany, Austria-Hungary, and the Ottoman Empire. The United States initially maintained neutrality under President Woodrow Wilson, but several factors, including German unrestricted submarine warfare and the Zimmermann Telegram, in which Germany sought Mexico's alliance against the U.S., led to American entry into the war in April 1917. U.S. forces, led by General John J. Pershing, helped turn the tide in favor of the Allies. The American Expeditionary Forces contributed to pivotal battles like the Battle of Cantigny and the Meuse-Argonne Offensive, marking the end of the war in November 1918. The entry of fresh U.S. troops and supplies was crucial in overcoming the stalemate on the Western Front. The Treaty of Versailles, signed in 1919, formally ended the war but imposed harsh reparations on Germany, contributing to the economic and political instability that would later lead to World War II. Despite playing a key role in victory, President Wilson's vision for a League of Nations was rejected by the U.S. Senate, signaling a retreat to isolationism. The war's aftermath reshaped the global order and set the stage for future conflicts. World War II, 1939 to 1945, U.S. involvement, 1941 to 1945. World War II was the most widespread and deadliest conflict in human history, involving over 100 million people from more than 30 countries. The war began in September 1939 when Germany, led by Adolf Hitler, invaded Poland, prompting Britain and France to declare war. The U.S. initially maintained neutrality but entered the war in December 1941 after Japan's surprise attack on Pearl Harbor. The U.S. joined the Allied powers, which included Britain, the Soviet Union, and China, in their fight against the Axis powers, led by Germany, Italy, and Japan. In the European theater, the U.S. played a significant role in campaigns such as the D-Day invasion of Normandy in June 1944, which began the liberation of German-occupied France. American forces also helped defeat the Axis powers in North Africa and Italy. Meanwhile, in the Pacific, U.S. forces fought key battles like Midway, Iwo Jima, and Okinawa, gradually pushing Japan back. The war culminated in the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki in August 1945, leading to Japan's surrender. World War II ended in 1945 with the unconditional surrender of Germany and Japan. The U.S. emerged as a global superpower, and the war's aftermath reshaped the global order, leading to the establishment of the United Nations and the beginning of the Cold War. Korean War, 1950 to 1953. The Korean War was a Cold War-era conflict between Communist North Korea, supported by China and the Soviet Union, and democratic South Korea, backed by the United Nations, primarily the United States. The war began in June 1950 when North Korea invaded South Korea, crossing the 38th parallel in an attempt to unify the peninsula under communism. President Harry Truman authorized U.S. involvement, framing the war as part of the global fight against communism. UN forces, led by General Douglas MacArthur, pushed North Korean troops back, advancing into North Korea until Chinese forces intervened, leading to a stalemate near the original border. Intense battles, such as those at Incheon and Porkchop Hill, resulted in heavy casualties on both sides. An armistice was signed in 1953, establishing the Korean Demilitarized Zone, DMZ, but leaving the peninsula divided. No formal peace treaty has ever been signed. The Korean War solidified the U.S.'s role as a global leader in the fight against communism and underscored the broader tensions of the Cold War, Vietnam War, 1955 to 1975. The Vietnam War was a prolonged conflict in Southeast Asia, primarily fought between Communist North Vietnam, supported by the Soviet Union and China, and non-Communist South Vietnam, backed by the United States. It was a pivotal part of the broader Cold War, with the U.S. aiming to prevent the spread of communism in Asia, following the domino theory, which suggested that if one country fell to communism, others would follow. U.S. involvement began in the early 1960s under President John F. Kennedy, escalating under President Lyndon B. Johnson. Despite significant U.S. military support and ground troop deployments, including over 500,000 troops at the war's peak, the conflict became increasingly unpopular due to the high death toll, media coverage, and lack of clear progress. Major battles such as the Tet Offensive in 1968, while initially seen as a failure for North Vietnam, turned public opinion against the war in the U.S. The war ended in 1975 with the fall of Saigon and the reunification of Vietnam under communist rule. The U.S. faced severe political and social upheaval as a result of the war, with widespread anti-war protests and a loss of confidence in government institutions. The Vietnam War left lasting scars on both American and Vietnamese societies, highlighting the complexities of foreign intervention. Gulf War, 1990 to 1991. The Gulf War, also known as the Persian Gulf War, was a conflict between Iraq, led by President Saddam Hussein, and a coalition of forces led by the United States. The war began in August 1990 after Iraq invaded Kuwait, aiming to control its oil reserves and gain access to the Persian Gulf. The invasion prompted international condemnation and a UN-mandated coalition to expel Iraqi forces from Kuwait. The U.S. and its allies, including the U.K., Saudi Arabia, and several other nations, launched Operation Desert Shield, followed by Operation Desert Storm, a massive air and ground campaign in January 1991. The coalition forces quickly defeated the Iraqi military, liberating Kuwait and driving Iraqi troops back into Iraq. The war lasted just over 6 weeks and was marked by the use of advanced technology, including precision-guided munitions. Despite the swift military victory, Saddam Hussein's regime was not toppled, and the war did not lead to a lasting peace in the region. The Gulf War showcased the effectiveness of modern warfare and reinforced the U.S.'s role as a dominant military power. It also set the stage for future conflicts in the Middle East, particularly the Iraq War in 2003, War in Afghanistan, 2001 to 2021. The war in Afghanistan, initiated in response to the September 11, 2001 terrorist attacks, marked the U.S.'s longest conflict. The war's primary objective was to dismantle the Taliban regime in Afghanistan, which had harbored al-Qaeda and its leader, Osama bin Laden. Under President George W. Bush, U.S. forces, along with NATO allies, launched Operation Enduring Freedom, swiftly ousting the Taliban from power in late 2001. However, the conflict became a protracted insurgency as the Taliban regrouped and launched attacks against Afghan and coalition forces. The U.S. and its allies supported the Afghan government in rebuilding the nation and combating insurgent forces. Despite military successes, the war faced challenges, including corruption, limited Afghan government control, and the persistence of the Taliban. In 2011, bin Laden was killed in a U.S. Navy SEAL raid in Pakistan, but the war continued for another decade. The U.S. and NATO officially withdrew from Afghanistan in August 2021 after negotiating a peace deal with the Taliban in 2020. The rapid Taliban takeover of the country in August 2021 and the chaotic evacuation of U.S. and allied personnel highlighted the challenges of nation-building and counterinsurgency efforts. The legacy of these wars continues to shape the course of American history. If you enjoyed this journey through the pivotal moments that defined a nation, don't forget to like and subscribe for more insightful content.